Hey, thanks for joining Shift Tab. I'm your host, Cory, and today we're joined by John Winsor, who is the founder and chairman of Open Assembly, executive fellow at the Harvard AI Institute, as well as the co-author of Open Talent. Now, John spent a ton of his career in kind of running and managing open talent and kind of bringing to the world new ways to work and helping organizations manage through that change. And so with today's lens and what AI is doing, it's very apt for him to share some of his wisdom since AI is impacting a lot of the different ways that organizations function. And a lot of people are having kind of a tough time on trying to read the tea leaves on what all of this means. So we're super happy to have John on today, and let's go ahead and bring him on. All right, John, how's it going, man? Thank you so much for joining the show today. It's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, I should say. Yeah. See, I'm the host most of the time, so I've ingrained to say thanks for being here.
I know. Well, look, I listen to a lot of the OA podcasts, so I know you know what you're doing. So, but yeah, no, I appreciate you having you on Shift Tab. So this is one of our early episodes to get out, but we're kind of like exploring the future of work, how AI is impacting work. So I think that you are extremely read into a lot of this with a lot of the work that you do at Harvard, as well as Open Assembly. You've got a book out, a number of things going on. So really excited to kind of dive through some of the questions and kind of topics that we're hearing, in the market from customers and others. But in the leading up to this, I gave a little bit of your background, but maybe you just want to give quick little intro just so people know who you are.
Yeah, I would say I'm on this lifelong mission to figure out, how to open the aperture of opportunities for people. The kind of the core thing that that I love about what Andela's about is like brilliance is abundant and opportunity is scarce. And, I guess I come to it from a personal perspective. Certainly all my work's been that, but, I adopted two boys in 2002 from the Far East of Russia. And so they're 24 now. And I often think like, man, the serendipity of just like one 30-second video, me seeing these two guys and then making this decision of like, I'm going to fly to Russia, the Far East, and pick up these two kids and, start a life with them. I mean, it's just total luck. But I often think about, they were in the adoption system, they were in the orphanage system. And right now, chances are because of being in the Far East, that's where Russia's taken a lot of their fighters for Ukraine. They'd be on the Ukrainian front or dead. And like, I'm really curious about that, right? Like why do people have these opportunities and it's so much of it's serendipity. And so, Harry and Charlie are awesome. They're not brilliant. They're just great, productive citizens and very curious, but they would have a totally different life. So I think everybody as human beings, we need to open this aperture of opportunities. And so my work all along has been that. Like I've always been kind of railing against the traditional way of building companies and doing them with open talent, whether it's magazine publishing or agencies and things like that. So that kind of landed me at Harvard, and a lot of the work I do intellectually around the book, Open Talent, and my new book, Explorer's Mindset.
Oh, amazing! Yeah, I didn't know that you had two adopted kids. That's incredible. Yeah, I think that offers like definitely a much more to home kind of perspective, right, on what opportunity means. But I've heard your story before. Like you have been early, kind of I think you were one of the pioneers of like the future of work and working remote. I've heard your story about moving down to, I think it was at Mexico to serve.
Yeah, Mexico, running a company from Mexico. And I mean, one of my favorite stories there is that, like there was like one tree in town. There were 7 landlines in town, and there was like a payphone too. And so I'd make a lot of my calls on the payphone. But there's one tree kind of in the middle of the beach, was right in the right place that you could sit under and call on your cell phone. So I found this guy. This is back in 2001, 2000. I found this guy, Brian, and Brian had an old school bus from Canada, and he actually absconded out of Canada with a bunch of Hughes satellite dishes. And so I bought a satellite dish from him for $6,000. And we actually poured the cement on top of my roof, and we geolocated the satellite from my roof, and then called on the payphone to Hughes Canada, lying that said we were actually in Northern Ontario, and got it hooked up, and I had internet, and it was crazy. And so kind of trying to figure out what it meant to work work remotely back then was kind of a hairy thing. But yeah, I've been on that lifelong mission. I think a lot of it is, and I think other people feel the same way. Is I'm a pretty selfish person. My family and my athletics are really, really important to me. And so, pursuing things like surfing and climbing and things that take a lot of time, you can't really do that from an office. And I think also just, growing up in my business life in Boulder, Colorado, just people always had this kind of really nice ambidexterity between their lived experience and then their work stuff. And it's much more balanced than, say, being in a culture like New York City or Paris or other places that I've worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so I can see the line kind of trajectory of like where you've came from. And, you were part of, working remote, part of this idea and like concept of new ways to work. But then it seems like you moved into a lot of like studying and actually like understanding what it means for organizations. And like, what does it mean for an organization to adopt kind of this concept of flex talent, remote work, a number of other things that I think have been very well outlined, like in your work at Harvard, also in your book and stuff. And so, I'm really curious, like from your point of view, are there any similarities between what you saw early in this concept of like crowdsourcing and open innovation and kind of what's happening right now with AI and agents almost as this like synthetic open work concept?
Yeah. There's a ton. That's a great question. There's a ton. I've just been riffing on this a lot lately, and I hope you can come to the community call tomorrow because we're gonna really dive deeper in this. But so my sense is when it all started, it was like, back in the day in the 80s when I was doing stuff, it was like, hey, who can I get to work for cheap? Because I can't really hire anybody, and I've got this little running magazine, and like, who's a runner I can pay a few dollars to do something? Can they go to the race and report? And that was just hacked together, and there wasn't a system, right? And so that was my goal with Open Talent: is how do we create a system for adoption that makes it easier for companies to understand, doing it in an organized way. And I think that was one of the things that's always held back Open Talent. I think also from the Open Talent perspective that a lot of HR, human, resources departments were really freaked out about the idea of freelancers just because they couldn't control them, and so there was certainly the big outsourcing movement to India, and that definitely kind of this in between, right? Contingent work, but lots of strict rules and regulations and compliance and security and all those things. And then the staffing industry obviously has been a big one that's kind of been somewhat similar. I find it interesting though, right? It's like I think that the staffing industry and HR, the whole human capital side of things, like, first of all, it always is odd for me that humans are called resources, right? It's like, I got some, but what do you got in the back? I got some bolts and I got some wire and I got some of those people back there too we could put to work. Like, it's just such a weird thing, right? And so I've always come from the perspective that like, you want to work with the best people, but sometimes the best people don't want to work for you, or don't want to work full time for you, or don't want to move pre-COVID to where you are. And so there are other ways to do that, especially as digital technology's grown. So I think that movement went from a very disorganized, hire a friend, throw an ad out on Facebook or wherever, right? Like, or even Craigslist before that, to a much more organized system, to platforms like Andela's that organize things that get people certified, that verify their quality of work, that give the ability for companies to kind of have this safety and security around hiring people. And certainly to me, platforms have been a huge advancement from staffing. Staffing to me is so interesting. It's just they're stuck in the old way of doing things, of local kind of hiring folks that are paid on commission to go find people locally to hire. And certainly that probably worked pretty well pre-digital. If you needed people in your Buenos Aires office, you'd want somebody on the ground as a recruiter to go find people to do that. But as digital, as we've become more interconnected, it just seems like freelance and using platforms are the way to go. back to the core mission we talked about, of brilliance abundant, opportunity scarce, opening the aperture of opportunities. As we kind of come into this new age of digital or synthetic workers, I see it as the same thing. I think that these things, like saying that your employees aren't as good as external things, that's an existential threat for companies, right? It's like, wait a second, I have this bureaucracy called HR and procurement, and you're saying that that's, that there are new ways to do things. AI is even a more existential threat, and using agents and synthetic labor, and what does that mean? I think the two fit together really well philosophically, because it's the ultimate democratization of expertise. You're building a lot of stuff. I'm building a lot of stuff. Every day I'm like, holy shit, that would have taken a week to do. Like, I would have had to aggregate all these experts and organize a team to get this done. And I did it in a half an hour. It's just unbelievable. And so I think what's going to happen is that what we're going to see is that there are going to be more jobs, but the jobs aren't going to look the same. That essentially what's going to happen is that the tasks that make up jobs are going to be unbundled from the jobs. And we can see this historically, right? Like, if we can think about it, even in the long history of, back in the day, there were positions called typists. And the reason that typists existed is that you couldn't make a mistake on a document to the SEC or a legal document. They had to be, no whiteout. They had to be correct, right? So the cost of correcting a mistake in a typed document was really expensive. You needed to kind of leverage all this expertise. Well, word processing came along, and that task inside typists got democratized, right? It all of a sudden, that task, like, all of us could do it. It's not that the task didn't get done anymore. It's just that it became so cheap that all of us could do that. And so sooner or later, enough tasks became unbundled from typists. The typist as a job just went away. Now, people became account executives and executive assistants and other kinds of jobs, and employment grew, but not the same way. And I think we're facing the same thing, right? People that can use AI well, that can manage teams of agentic workers, can do amazing things these days, really, really outperform other folks. But that's a huge mindset shift for organizations. And I think what I'm seeing right now, the thing that I'm kind of hot about today and getting ready for tomorrow's call, is what I'm seeing. And I'd love to get your impression about this, but I'm seeing that so many people are kind of, in that experimental phase of like, let's just go apply AI to these things. And so it's almost like, spray and pray, right? Like, let's just get everybody to use the tools. There's no organizational structure about like, okay, what's a framework? What's a process for adoption? How do we change the organization in a thoughtful way, instead of going like, oh, Cory kicked ass in that AI experiment, let's scale it across the organization. Yeah, it might work. It might not work. Who knows? And so I think we're coming to this idea that as the technology becomes more mature, that we need a framework and we need process, and we need, and to me, it's not different than Open Talent. Open Talent lacked a process, lacked a system, right? As I've debated this with a lot of people, it's no different to me than, you're 60-year-old and you go to the doctor and it's like, your heart's kind of, it's got some questions. You got to like lose a little weight and maybe, do some exercise. And so you're like, okay, I got to do some exercise. And you try to find, a trainer with a framework that you can buy into. But to me, it's not about the framework. It's not even about the trainer. It's about the fact that you go to the gym every day, right? It's the fact that you have a process, that you're making progress and you're seeing where you are in the process. And so I think that's where we're going. I think very quickly we'll see a bunch of frameworks come out, and it'll be less, spray and pray, and it'll be more organized. So, and I think the way that talent fits into this picture is that, it's really, really hard for organizations. The spray and pray is like, we just did a deal. We have a license to OpenAI. Hey, everybody use OpenAI. Like, really? Okay. Like, what about assessing their capabilities? What about like, Like, are they learning? Like, what are the tools that we can say, like, hey, Cory's doing great, John's like not doing so good. He's probably not up for the challenge, or he needs to go do something else. And so it seems like this whole new way of working needs a lot of fundamental tools. And a lot of it is around assessment and learning. A lot of it is like, how do we know that we've got all these models, we've got all these subscriptions, but are people using them? Not just using them, we can see the usage, but like, are they really accelerating not just individual learning, but organizational change in learning? That's what I think is most interesting.
Yeah, I can't agree enough. And like that, I mean, and so we're seeing the same thing, like especially with the whole fire and forget of AI, where it's like, here's a bunch of licenses, go use it. And then most people don't understand, like, it's not as intuitive. It might be to use ChatGPT to like figure out a blueberry recipe, like if you've got some nascent question, but to actually apply it within everyday work is not as quite as easy as everyone sees. And we start to find, like what I've seen kind of firsthand is AI adoption typically happens in like these little pockets, right? You'll get one person within a team that figures out how to do it, and they have social capital with the people around them that trust them, that if they're saying, hey, this is cool, then you start to get this kind of like organic growth. I saw it firsthand. A previous company in our engineering team, we had a super senior like principal architect that was very against the tech, and so the team as a whole was kind of not really there for AI coding assistance. And then I don't know what happened, but one day the switch flipped and he started becoming a proponent. Next thing you knew, all of the little people in the orbit around him were all of a sudden on board as well. And so
for sure,
finding and understanding those pockets. But I want to go back to one thing you said, because I think it's extremely interesting. And I heard you mention this on your podcast with one of the professors from Harvard, but it's this idea in relation to the typist, right? And that the cost of the mistake is going down. And like typically you would have an expert in a role, because the cost of having a novice that makes mistakes is too expensive. So you get an expert in, the cost of mistake goes down. And so do you see like individuals, or do you see AI as maybe this more, and that the way that you reference it, it historically happens in like very targeted, very acute areas, right? Like a typist here, or, some other role there. But do you see AI as almost this more universal tool that makes maybe that like all of the cost of the mistakes go down, right? Because now more people can kind of up level, does this, is that something that like kind of rings in your mind at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see that in all the news, right? You hear like, hey, the job of a coder like is changing radically. Like the idea of writing code is probably a thing of the past. The idea of managing a bunch of agents and doing QA and understanding kind of strategically where it needs to go and what you need to build and what's kind of efficient token usage. Those are just new roles that haven't been thought about. Like, what's the right model, right? There's all this debate now of like, do we use the kind of the big US models, or are we going for the open weight models that we can do a lot of the work, and then what work gets done with what model? And that's a whole different new thing that's just emerging, right? A whole new kind of category of strategic thinking. Some people are really up for that. Some people aren't up for that, right? And so I think what we'll see is a lot of kind of micro entrepreneurs doing things, and they could be, kind of entrepreneurs, right, inside companies that do things. The issue in my mind is still like that, what you talked about in your last company, and that is that there are still folks that are just like, they're nervous, right? They're kind of in the middle to the end of their career, and they're like, oh shit, man, I gotta fucking change this shit again. Like I'm not up for it, man. This is like too existential. I just want to make my salary, write my code, go home, have a really wonderful life, go to the lake on the weekends. And like, for me to put in the energy as a 50-year-old, somebody that's really accomplished, and I have a lot of identity on my code is killer. Like, that's really hard to do. Even if somebody wants to change, like I feel it these days. It's like really, really hard to change your stripes. And so I think that's the bigger issue, right? Is because if the senior folks are wobbly, or they're not fully invested in it, and they don't have guidance, the junior guys aren't going to step out and say, hey, I did this with AI today. Like, am I going to get fired? Am I not? Like, how am I going to be perceived? Am I a rogue element? I'm just trying to grow my career. So I think it starts with that kind of validation and usage at the highest level. And the honest kind of caveat that none of us know what we're doing, right? We're all trying to learn as fast as we can, but there's no expert, no matter who people can say they're expert, but there's no such thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We had it's funny you mentioned that, because we had a question yesterday that came in from one of our customers that was, because like we do a lot with like on the learning and development side, and they're like, how do you make sure that your content and stuff is always, up to date with the latest,
right?
Whatever the flavor of the hour is for what you should be doing right now. Like I just saw, there was an interview with Boris Chesney, the creator of Claude Code, and he is now on the boat that, prompting LLMs or prompting coding agents is now old, loops. Right? Now everything's loops, which, and like I can conceptually understand, Ralph loops were a thing and all of this, but those loops burn an infinite amount of tokens, which, if you're Boris and you've got an infinite supply of tokens, then sure, like probably is the best way. And so, like, we see, and I'm curious your feedback on this too, is that, we see a lot of leaders and business leaders with questions, questioning what they hear as almost, I want to say like the marketing spew of art of the possible versus what is weird or real. And I think that, some of that even happened to some degree with like flex work and open talent. At some point, it was kind of for like, sure. Oh my gosh, you can just throw it all out to the crowd and like things will happen. And then there was the reality of some of it. But, do you see any parallels there? And if so, like, are there any like concepts or lessons that people should think about when they go to approach this?
Well, I mean, I think, there's so many, but I would say that, we start with the premise that, AI has taken all the oxygen out of the system. And so when Jensen Wang or any of those guys, Sam Altman say, oh, you're going to be spending, half of an employee's salary on tokens. Of course they're saying that because they're in the business of selling lots of tokens. Right. Yeah. And so, I think that what, in all these areas, there's this new level of partners and new level of kind of positions that are almost curators of the latest stuff. Like, like you guys are really focused on, the assess and learn loop and understand like, yeah, good luck client, good luck keeping up with all the new models. That's our job, right? That's what we do. We can apply your technology, our technology and our learning internally to your company or externally to other kinds of crowds of people to understand what the base metric is. Yeah. It's no different, I don't think, than, when companies decided strategically to say there are some jobs that we don't need to have internally. We can outsource those things, right? Call centers, things like that. And I think that's going to be a big movement. Now, I think that we need to go through this like level set of like, what is what does it mean to be an AI ready, software engineer and how do we define that? What does that mean? It's a moving target every day, but how do you kind of do enough kind of real-time assessments so that you can have some kind of pulse on what does that mean? Where do those models meet and be able to kind of advise companies on that and supply the talent if they need it or supply the learning and assessment. But to me, that's the thing. I've often thought about this. I think we have gotten to the point right before AI that, hiring talent isn't that hard. Like you have lots of platforms, lots of staffing companies, lots of experts, lots of ways to hire people. What's really hard is to hire the right talent. Mm-hmm. Right. That's like spot on that can do the work. And the problem is those cycles used to be 4 or 5 years, 10 years. You could get somebody stuck in and they could kind of learn on the system and build the stuff that needed to be built, but yet learn, in their kind of quarterly workshops or upskilling sessions. And that's all thrown out the window now. So the reinvention of that, it's almost too hard I think for organizations to continually to keep the lights on and to change their L&D system and to create this whole new motion without some kind of external intervention. And that could be an intervention of like, let's just assess where everybody is. Or it could be like, let's assess and compare. And oh my gosh, here's some gaps you have. We can actually fill in some of those gaps to upskill you really quickly. And not on a permanent basis, but on a flex basis, right? The ability to kind of parachute in is like, okay, you're going to have to really focus on upskilling in this area of your software engineering team. But as they upskill, let's make sure we're up to speed on the models, and you've got kind of benches of teams that can go in and do things, kind of a rapid response. To me, it's sort of like, it's sort of like it's almost a military analogy. It's like you've got, the regular army or the regular Marines, and then you've got kind of the badass, like, SEAL Team 6 and those guys. But even beyond that, what we're seeing in Ukraine, like Ukraine in the military is out innovating anybody, right? Because with all the drones and the AI, and it's totally changing the concept of like, who's the real leader? It's no longer like the US or China, it's little Ukraine that's really doing that. And that's because they have to. It's an existential threat. They have to learn. That's one of the things I've always loved about freelance, right? It's like in bigger, let's just take ad agencies, because that's where I was, you would always try to manage the staff, right? So you'd have somebody like that was an expert, 15 years on radio, right? Like, here's the best radio creative in the world. Great. But, radio is kind of going like this. And so you need to redeploy them somewhere and have them learn, like, hey, continue to do the radio, but on your off hours, learn this social media thing. Well, that's great. But wouldn't it be better just to go hire some young Turk who's like the expert in social media and hire them from a freelance standpoint? Like, what kind of timeline does an organization have to reinvent itself? I would say back then it was fine. You could turn somebody over and they could take a year to learn the nuances. I mean, now the way things are going, you have to have somebody deployed and ready to rock and be able to kind of deploy to your clients or reinvent your stack within days. There's no time to do traditional, retraining or move people around. And so understanding kind of, and that's the other thing that I've always been really intrigued with. It's like, maybe, it's my perspective of being kind of a 0 to 1 entrepreneur, but at the end of the day, it's about the work, right? And the work is like, how do I satisfy my customer? It's not about like hiring policies and about vacation time and internal training. It's like, how do I most efficiently deliver what I promise my clients at the best of my abilities to do? And anything that gets in that way, anything that gets in the way of that outcome should be circumspect. Like, you can't build these kind of little castles or internal, systems that don't deliver on that. Right. And I think that's what's happened in big organizations is like people have different missions. Like, yeah. We're here to satisfy the customers, but really our job in HR is to decrease, to increase retention of employees. What the hell does increasing the retention of employees have to do with doing a better job of satisfying the needs of a customer? And so I think this kind of what's happening is that all the bureaucracies are going to get stripped away, and we're going to be able to focus on the work, like the work that needs to be done to satisfy the needs of our customers, to grow the business the most efficiently. And that's going to mean this decoupling of the tasks from the jobs and reassigning those, some synthetic, some freelance, some reorchestrated or reorganized jobs. But that's a real existential threat to an organization. If you're if you're in the business of like, my number one goal is to retain people as long as I can. First of all, why is that even a good goal? Right? It seems to me like you want fresh thinking. But somebody said it was a goal, and it's a goal. And so that's kind of the corporate mantra of, we're going to create a great place to work, and have longevity and employment. And so I think all those things are really scary for organizations to reorganize. And we're in this kind of big upheaval right now of not just reorganizing, but even before that, like, what is the right kind of mindset you have to have? because I think, based on a lot of the work I've done with Mike Tushman, I love his work around, kind of ambidexterity and two ways organizations have to act at once, this kind of exploit or operationalize, which I think works really, really well in a stable culture. But then the explore or, really understand these new things and create new systems. To me, that works really, really well in a chaotic environment, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the mindset you have to start to develop. And it's all about empathy and curiosity and honesty and all those things that sometimes get in the way of kind of running a traditional organization or one that's set up to exploit the opportunity ahead of them.
Yeah, I agree. And it seems, I was reading a book about, the potential for like skill degradation in the age of AI. But one of the things that they link back up to is that, while it might it will, and it's already showing that it's starting to impact skill development. Like it also has downstream effects on organizational culture and what it means. You don't have this necessarily same bond between novices or junior employees as you still had between experts, because the whole goal of a company is to reduce uncertainty and maximize efficiency. And so, why force? And this actually came up yesterday too, which is so funny that we're talking about it now. But one of our senior engineers was saying, hey, when I'm reviewing these PRs, these code reviews that come in, why do I need to leave comments? Can't I just hit the AI button and have it fix it, and it fixes it and we go? And I think the interesting part is that it's good to leave feedback because the junior engineers need to understand why whatever they submitted was wrong.
Right.
And it's I think that the eventual, all of these kind of things we're starting to see are going to start to show themselves in interesting ways. But the last question, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, is that you've seen a lot of these innovative new technologies, new ways of working kind of come through the market, and you've been able to have the knowledge and the wisdom to reflect, to start to kind of see similarities from it. And so 5 years from now or 10 years from now, when we look back at AI and everything that kind of eventually came on board, what do you think that the organizations that got it right saw, and then the ones that got it wrong, what did they really miss? What might that be?
Well, I think it's, I think it starts with kind of this, and that's what I'm trying to write about in this new book, The Explorer's Mindset. I think it starts with a mindset. So I had a really interesting call. I wrote, I've been writing a bunch for HBR lately, and, one of the senior editors, one of the executive editor called me and said, hey, I'm writing an article about, the adoption of AI, and we're trying to help, executives build, help them understand how to build AI to meet their strategy. And I was like, wow, that's kind of, I just walked away with that, and I called her back finally, and I was just like, that's such a weird thing, because, to me as a founder and as a 0 to 1 entrepreneur, all I care about is purpose. I've created this new ski glove, and, I want to get it to customers. I love it. I want to get it to customers. That's the purpose, right? A strategy is just a steps on how to do it. So the what is the purpose, right? The problem is and I've seen this happen a lot on boards I've sat on, that where we start as an entrepreneur super passionate, let's say, about climbing equipment, right? And they're really, really into, delivering amazing climbing equipment, not just for themselves, but for their posse and for the community. They don't care how they do it, right? They don't care what strategy works. The problem is you hire professional managers, and somehow the how, the what, the deliver, the purpose becomes the how, right? The process. And all of a sudden the strategy becomes the what. It's so weird to me. It's like, oh, there's, if I want to sell a climbing equipment, there's 1,000 strategies to do it. That's not going to be, one strategy is not going to be at the center of my organization. The purpose is to deliver that thing to the customers who want it. And I think somehow professional managers have gotten in the way, because of their training and because markets are consistent, of conflating the how with the what. And so to me, that's where it starts, right? It's like, okay, all bets are off. We have to go like, what is our purpose? To deliver excellent, banking, to solve the pain of liquidity for individuals. Like, let's throw away all our strategies. Let's not worry about that. It probably means that a lot of professional managers are going to need to lose their jobs, senior leaders, because they need to get back to that kind of fire in the belly, Series A, like we got to get with the customers, be close to them, understand what's needed, and to deliver on that is most efficient. So I think that's one thing, starting at the top, like what's our purpose? And then how do we use the latest tools, the hows, right? And obviously AI falls into that to get to deliver better products, and I think the companies that are really kicking ass in AI have that kind of vision, right? Of like, this is our how, this is our purpose, this is our reason for being. And oh my God, look at all these new tools that we can use to more efficiently deliver better products faster. That's awesome. That's number one. And I think number two is like, you got to walk the walk. Like if you're, if you're an open talent platform, you gotta hire freelancers. You gotta be a community of freelancers internally and externally. Like if you're an AI advisory company, you gotta be like, everything's got to be built on AI. Right. If you're that's one of the things I've always loved about brands like Nike or brands like Patagonia. You walk onto the campus in Beaverton at Nike and you go to the track, which is right in the center of campus. And there are a bunch of awesome world-class runners running around the track. Probably 1/5 are world-class. The others are just really good runners that work at Nike, but you can't tell the difference, right? They're so into it. They're so into like this thing. And I think that's where a lot of companies are going to really fuck up. I think that they see this is the latest trend. It's going to be really cool. Hey, we've got an AI offering. We're awesome. We're not really willing to change the way we've done things. Oh yeah, that new thing or using freelance talent's great, but our system internally is way too complicated to actually use freelance. And I think these days, it's the world's just way too transparent. If you don't walk the walk, you're toast, right? Yeah. So it's not just talking the talk, it's walking the walk. And so I think that just not only goes externally to customers, it's internally. Like, how could you take seriously some CEO that's saying like, you got to use AI, you got to do these things? And it's like, I love this thing. This came up at Harvard is like, what CEO really wants to adopt AI? Because they have an AI. It's called an executive assistant. They just write a prompt in an email and the thing gets done. Like, holy shit, that's amazing, right? That's unbelievable. Yeah. Like to them, AI works really, really well, right? It's super simple. Like, hey, build me a new app that gets this done. Like, boom, done. Like somebody in your office the next day showing you the app. So, but who's going to take that leader seriously? Yeah. And so you got to walk the walk, right? You got to like be in there and fail and learn. And if you're going to be representative of like, in my category, I'm the leader in the future 5 years from now, like you suggested, it's like the skin knees, right? It's like the thought doership. Like tell me about the failures in your own system, why it worked, why it didn't, how are you guys making it happen? What does that mean? But if you don't really believe in it, then like customers and team members and communities will just they'll smell that out really, really quickly. So anyway, that's I get on my high horse about that, and it's really hard, right? It's like I've had to fight it my whole career. It's like whatever company I've started, it's like we're dedicated to freelance. Oh, we need to hire 5 more creative directors. It's like, okay, but why aren't we using, like, that's the real question of like, why isn't it good enough for us if we're saying it's the best thing since sliced bread? And I think the same thing with AI, right? It's like, if you're saying like, hey, this new AI enabled system is great, but like assessment and learning, like real-time assessment and learning, but let's not forget about the quarterly review or the 360 annual review. You're just like, okay, are we in or are we not? Like, we got to decide. And I think that's going to become really obvious 5 years from now, because we're in this kind of high growth place, and you no longer can sit on the side of the river and analyze the river and then go tell customers what's happening in the river. You got to be in the river. right?
Yeah.
You got to be in the eddies, you got to be in the rapids, you got to like, oh, that was fucked up. I deployed that new, like tool above an AI, and it totally screwed me up. Or this new model I thought it was going to be great. It's horrible. That's what's going to make a difference.
Yeah. No, I think that's incredible advice. And I think it's so important that like stick to the mission, just because I think over like the past 6 years, right? Like 6 years ago, or maybe 7 years ago, right? Pre-pandemic, right? Like blockchain was the thing. And I saw so many companies, I'm a blockchain company, that are now, I'm an AI company. And I think that advice, like you've got to stay close to the mission and why you're doing it, lets you cut above the knee jerking of what's going around. And will kind of give you some of that longevity, which then filters down through the rest of the org. So that's extremely, extremely good advice. And I'm very big supporter of it.
I mean, I would just add one thing, to that, to get you to there, to shift your mindset, to shift your kind of ability to walk the walk. Like, you are who you hang with, right? And if you hang with a bunch of folks, if you're a CEO and you go to the CEO roundtables and you love to go to New York quarterly and drink wine and stay in really fancy hotels, it's like, that's your culture. And that's the thing. One of the things I love to tell this story, when I sold to Havas, two really incredible experiences I had, when I became chief innovation officer at Havas, and I was a dirtbag like entrepreneur, right? Yeah. So the two things that really got me was, like, first of all, like, I stayed in shitty hotels in New York, right? Like, because every dime that I spent on a hotel, it was one dime out of my pocket. Yeah. Right. And so the first thing that happened is, in our negotiation of, my position, the head of HR in Paris said, okay, now it's time for us to talk about your travel budget. And so I was like, I've never had a travel budget. I like, if it's going to be a profitable thing, I'll go travel. And so this guy said, he's like, well, what do you think about $450? And I was like, well, $450, I won't be able to get to New York. That's not very much money. And his point was like, no, $450,000. And I probably could have pushed it to 600, but I didn't, I didn't know what I was doing. The thing that really got me, and what I noticed to myself, is it created all these really bad habits. Like, I wouldn't, like, after 6 months, I only flew first class. Like, going to Paris for a day, it's in my budget. Well, like, why not just go for the meeting and fly back to Boulder? Like, no big deal. Yeah. And the other thing that was really interesting is that there was all this cultural pressure, right? Like, everybody stayed at the Dominic, which used to be the Trump Soho, at Havas, because it was really close, which was $1,000 a night. In fact, my room at the Trump Soho was bigger than my house in Mexico, where I was living at the time. And so, but I stayed across the street at this shitty hotel, but I got so much crap from the other C-level guys in the Havas. It was almost like I was offending them by trying to save money and do things in a new way. And so I unfortunately relented. Like, I started staying at the Soho Grand, and it was, at the Trump Soho, and it was awesome, right? I loved going to my, 800 square foot room. I loved taking my first class, flights to Paris overnight and work for a day and come back. It was awesome. Yeah. But that's the kind of cultural stuff that needs to change, right? It's like, everybody right now is a Series A. Everybody. And there's no more like, oh, we can, do it first class, or we can do it this way. It's like, every dollar needs to be going to reinventing your organization to better serve your customers, or you are toast. So,
no, that's, I think that's extremely, extremely good advice. And I haven't, one of my bucket list things is to fly first class to Paris. So one day I'll
it's
I'll
not
make
that big a deal. There are these things called like Ambien and sleeping pills that it doesn't really matter what class you fly.
Yeah, be standing in the back wouldn't know. Yeah,
exactly. I got a great.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you so much for stopping by. I really, really appreciate the time. Look forward. We'll see you, on the OA call tomorrow, which we're really excited to hear what you're working on. And then congratulations on the new books. But if there's anything else you want listeners to know about that you've got in the works or stuff coming up, time to give a plug if you got one.
Not really. I think my big goal in life is one of the things I'm loving about AI is just, and building agents and doing all this stuff is just like making my life way more efficient so I can spend more time climbing and surfing. Because that's my big goal. I've got my new surfboard right here, and I've been practicing my pop-ups here in Boulder, and so getting ready for a couple big surf trips. So that's kind of what's on my agenda, is just continuing to try to explore over the horizon and look for the next swell that's coming in. Certainly the AI swell is a fun one to surf.
Yeah, that it is. Well, on that, thank you so much for stopping by, and until next time, enjoy.
Yeah, thanks, man.
All right, folks, that was John. Thank you so much again, John, for stopping by. As you can see, like, we covered a lot of different topics in here, but I think at the end of the day, his ending message on, in a world as noisy as we live in today, and I'm not talking about just AI, but also a lot of the recent trends, blockchain had its blip up, AI is having a blip up now. Everyone can say, oh, it's different, but that's what everyone said before. So no one really knows how this pans out. Is that keeping very true to the mission and kind of purpose of what your company is there to do is so, so important. So thank you again, John, for stopping by. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.